two-part debate. Now we're going to be talking about whether gay marriage should be legal or not in America. This time, Mr. David Smalley will be the affirmative, and Dr. Barry Creamer will be the negative. We're going to compress this one a little shorter than the previous one, but there will still be ample opportunity to ask questions after the debate ends. Just a brief reminder, please check your cell phones, please. There was a couple stray rings in the last debates. And please, let's give a round of applause for a gracious host, the secular students at Carleton College. It's really hard to get this the debate itself is free, but a $5 suggested donation is always welcome. And if you're interested in joining the club, if you're a student here at Collin or you just live close to here, talk to that guy in the back, Patrick Smith. He's the president and a really good friend of mine. So without further ado, let's get debating again. So, Mr. Smalley, come on up.
Everybody's thinking, oh no, he brought the Bible with him. Yes, I did. This is such an important topic. It's very important, especially because of the upcoming election. I think everybody here is very clear on where both parties stand on marriage equality. So, because my opponent is Christian, I know he turns to the book of the Holy Bible for not only guidance, but also not necessarily just strict rules, but also just generic good ways to live, good ways to treat other people, good ways to interact and think about certain things. So I'm actually going to read a little bit from the Bible today to talk about why gay marriage should be legal. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the parable in Matthew 20, but it's called the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Now, basically, and I'm going to do some paraphrasing as I go, and he'll obviously have an opportunity to refute anything that I get wrong. But Matthew 20 is basically about an owner of a vineyard who needs workers. It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now when he agreed with them, the laborers, for 1 coin for all day of labor." So basically he goes out, finds a laborer for 1 day, and agrees to pay them a coin, and they agree to work for that coin for the entire day. Later, at about the 3rd hour, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You also go to the vineyard, and I'll pay you what is right." Some verses say, or some translations say fair. Again he went out by the 6th hour and the 9th hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and said to them, "Why are you standing around?" And they said, "Because no one's hired us." So he said, "Come to the vineyard and I'll pay you what is fair." So we've got people that started all day, 3rd hour, 6th hour, 9th hour, and then people that just began working in the 11th hour. In the evening come, the owner went to the vineyard steward, and some say the foreman. And he said, "Call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last that we hired, and pay them until you get to the first ones we hired." When those came that were hired last, who had only began work in the 11th hour, the owner paid them 1 coin. So naturally, when the people who had been working all day came for their pay, they said, "No, I need some more cash because you paid those guys 1 coin and they only worked for an hour. We worked all day." Now, subjectively, we may agree with that concept, but he says to them, he answered one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree to work for me all day for this 1 coin? Take what is yours and go." Now, in today's standards, that makes... Okay, look at it like this. In today's standards, if you saw that happen, you wouldn't be happy about it. But really, what leg would you have to stand on to say, I deserve more money for working? You agreed at the beginning of the day to work for that wage, and you only changed your opinion of your own value when you saw that someone else had something better. The purpose of the parable, in my opinion, and that's the way parables must be interpreted, is my opinion, is when you make an agreement or you have something of value, someone else having something of value can't devalue what you have because you determine your own value. Your value isn't set by others. The purpose of me bringing the parable of Matthew 20 up in this debate is Christians who are married, your marriage is perfectly valuable at what you value your marriage to be. People getting married of the same gender should not devalue your marriage, nor should you even worry about what they're doing. Your own marriage is set by your own value, however strong you may feel about that. But these two other people that get married, now they're married too. Now they have the same title. How does that devalue anything that you have? Matthew 20 says it doesn't. And if you're going to be consistent and you're going to read from the Bible, from parables on how to interact with people, you've got to take that parable to understand that what you have is yours and what other people have is theirs. And you can't base your value of your life or your marriage on someone else's version of marriage. It was never made illegal, completely illegal, for gays to be married, in Texas anyway, until 2005. It was actually put into law. So if you want to be traditional, if you want to be historical, you should have left it alone. But is it about being traditional? Or is it about pushing an agenda and taking rights away from people that don't agree with your worldview? The bottom line is, anytime in our nation's history, when you're moving toward taking rights away from citizens of this country, every time you lose. Thank you.
So the terms that we need to talk about are marriage and rights and toleration. I thought you were going to go down the equality road with the parable that you were doing, and we can talk about that later if we need to as well. The trick on this issue is that people don't get what rights are. So that's the main thing I want to talk to you about. To get there, let me do the first two. Marriage. Not the Princess Bride. Marriage. That's what I'm tempted to say. You know, look, people live together. That's not marriage. Not what it is. Anybody can live together. They do it now. Anybody can go live with whoever they want to live with. That's not the same thing as marriage. People share a house. It's not marriage. They share a car. It's not marriage. They share an agreement for what they're going to do with their lives. That's not marriage. It's living together. It's whatever you want it to be, but it's not marriage. Buddies can live together. You know, lovers can live together. Non-lovers can live together. Living together is not marriage. Having sex with each other is not marriage. It's not what it is. So what on earth is it? Well, it's this contractual thing. You can make all the contracts you want. It's not marriage. So you can do powers of attorney and have whoever you want represent you in any circumstance. When I am incapacitated, this is the person who already has power of attorney. They can step in at any moment and make decisions on my behalf to represent me. See, there are all kinds of contractual ways to do all that shared resources stuff. Now the tax code rewards marriage and in other ways punishes marriage at different times depending on who the tax code's coming from, but we all agree it's all messed up anyway. It'd be different or whatever. But that's not what marriage is. So exactly what is marriage? Well, it's very simple. It is a social sanction on a relationship. Sanctions used in two different ways. One is approbation, one is reprobation. This is approval of this relationship. It's society saying, it's a social statement, this is why you go get a marriage license. This is why you have an officiant at the marriage. So if it's a justice of the peace or a pastor, and that's not even a biblical practice. It's not like in the scriptures, in the New Testament, you find churches doing weddings. It's a social thing. We just happen to have instantiated that in our culture into the practice of churches. But it is a social practice. It's not about the two people being together. It's about society saying, we have put them together. And that's why you have an obligation that's built into it. It used to be such an obligation that you had to have some pretty substantial evidence if you wanted to go and break that obligation with that person, get a divorce. So we've sort of changed it since then. So keep that in mind when we say we want same-sex marriage. We're not saying we just want homosexuality to be okay. That's not what this issue is. It's same-sex marriage. That's the question. It's not just can people exchange contracts, and that's not even what the homosexual community wants, right? I mean, the whole thing is we don't want some legally defined status that's not marriage, but is all of the things that marriage entails. We don't want that. We want marriage. Why is that? Because marriage is a social sanctioning. It's a thing that says we approve of this relationship. We, therefore, establish this relationship. And that's why the couple make a promise, not just to each other, but to these witnesses. That's the nature of it. That's what it's been historically. So if you have that in mind, then the question of whether someone has a right to marriage changes completely. But we're so perverted in our sense of what a right is. We are so turned about in our understanding of what the word right means that it's not even, I don't even know how to bridge broach the topic without having to clarify it. So, because we say I have a right to health care, I have a right to a taco, I have a right to go to the movies, I have a right to all these things that you don't have a right to. They don't make any sense philosophically. A right has to be this negative thing, meaning when we say at the beginning of our existence, you have a right to life, liberty, and property. Doesn't mean you have a right to life. Right to life? What would that even mean? You get cancer or your arm cut off in such a way that you're going to bleed to death, and you say, my rights are being violated. People die. This is what happens. A right to life is the right to, it's actually a prevention, a negative, but it's the right not to have someone else take that life from you. That's the whole point. That's why we call them negative rights. Right to property isn't a right for you to own property. It's a right for you to keep the property that's yours, meaning no one else can just take it from you. That's what the right to property is about. It's right, life, liberty, and property. Right to autonomy isn't the right to float or levitate. It's the right not to make your own decisions, not to have someone else imposing their will on you instead. It's the right to life, liberty, and property. The reason they are that is because the whole nature of rights is that everyone has them together. Everyone has the same rights. By definition, that's what they are. They're the thing everyone has. So, by definition, you can only have negative rights because if I say you have a right to life and it means you get to live, it's inherently violated. If I say you have a right to property and it means you have a right to a Coca-Cola, then where we run out of Coca-Cola, somebody's going to be in conflict with you. So we make rights negative instead of positive because positive rights inherently create a conflict of rights, a conflict in the society. So rights are negative. Meaning marriage can't be a right, because if you have a right to marriage, of any kind, a right to marriage, then you have a right to force someone to marry you. You don't have that. You have a right not to be prevented from marriage by someone else. That's fair enough. You say, well, that's all we want. We just want the right to go and get married. But marriage isn't something you're doing yourself. Marriage is what the society does. Marriage is a social sanctioning. So the third word, toleration, comes in right here. You are not saying to me, when you say, you have to allow us to have same-sex marriage, you're not saying to me, you have to be more tolerant. You're saying to me, I am not allowed to express with the other people in my society who believe that marriage should be between a man and a woman. You are saying, I have to give up that belief and give my sanctioning social approval to your relationship, even if I don't agree with it. That's why I don't believe it ought to be given. It's not a right to begin with.
You said that marriage is strictly social.
Not strictly social, but it is a social sanctioning, yeah.
If there's a selection of marriage that is social, there are many people here that wouldn't care if society thought they should be married or not. A lot of people, including me, I don't think 18-year-olds should get married. I think it's silly. But I think they should legally be able to. I think the general consensus is, if you were to walk around with microphones and say, do you think a 19-year-old should get married? Would you tell your 19-year-old son or daughter to get married? I think the general sociological consensus is that that would be too young to get married, even though they legally can.
I got married at 20.
There are some people 40, 50 years ago that thought interracial marriage should be illegal. There were a large number of people that thought that shouldn't happen.
Sure.
So there may be one specific social aspect of marriage, but I think it's a very small aspect. I think marriage comes with legal rights. And when you said that living together, being in love is not marriage, sharing property is not marriage, staying together and purchasing things together is not marriage. All the things that you say are not marriage, the state of Texas disagrees. Because there is such a thing as common law, and if you are together long enough and you present yourself as a couple and you share property, you may have to get divorced by the state of Texas even though you never actually got married. As far as the power of attorney goes, it's right. But telling, and I'm sure we'll get into this, I'm not sure if you agree with civil unions or not for same-sex couples, but saying, well, you can get similar to the rights, you can go get a power of attorney, you just can't be married. To me, that's a lot like saying, you can get on the bus, you just can't sit here. And I think it's on the wrong side of history. I think it's taking rights away from people that they already did have it, and I actually believe it is a right. And I don't think that marriage is purely social. I think that largely it's legal, and I think people who are of the same sex should have the same rights to get married and make bad decisions that we all have the ability to do. And telling them that they have to do it under a different title or under a civil union or under a power of attorney, to me, is ultimately discrimination.
Your response?
Okay, number one is, I have not at all said that the only things involved in marriage are social. That's not the case. It is the case that when you are married, you share your property. When you are married, you share a sexual relationship. When you are married, you live together. All those things follow from marriage. I said those things don't make marriage what it is. So saying you share property does not mean you are married. So it's the opposite implication. You can't just reverse it. So you're correct. There is more to marriage than just the social. But it is the social sanctioning that is essential to the nature of marriage. It's what makes it marriage instead of just living together or anything else. And that's why we're already in agreement about civil unions. I think that's a silly answer. I think it's a pretense. We want to do it because we feel guilty, and so we don't want the name marriage somehow tainted, so we're going to do it. I'm with you completely on civil unions. It's not a good answer. I do not agree with that at all. So, but for different reasons. You want to go the whole way, and I don't want to go any other way. You understand what I'm saying? Yes. You're right. That's hypocritical. I find it a bad answer, so thank you. Your statement I don't think 19-year-olds should get married. Well, I don't get to pick either. I mean, the society picks. So if you have a Prop 8 in California, or you have a state that defines marriage a certain way, and, you know, the statement, we passed a law 6 years ago, so if you want to defend tradition, just leave it alone. Laws are passed when things come to be an issue. They're not passed when there's no issue. So there's no point. I mean, the tradition is in the fact that there wasn't a law. The fact that the law was so easily passed after that is evidence that the tradition was being threatened or challenged in a way that's not comfortable for people. So that's why that happens. But I don't get to pick myself. I'm not society. I am one part of the society. So I don't get to say, I don't believe in marriage because I don't believe in marriage. So let me jump to your example, because you've done this repeatedly, this time with interracial marriage. Of course, there are certain rejections or restrictions that are wrong, and those ought to be removed. I don't think every restriction is right. I think this restriction is right. Do I think a restriction on interracial marriage is right? Of course not. That's absurd. I'm not, and in fact, there are a lot of people who are very offended at the equivalence that tries to rise in the nature of saying homosexuality, same-sex marriage, is equivalent to the civil rights movement of the 60s. There are a lot of people who are offended by that because they disagree with same-sex marriage, but they themselves are beneficiaries of the civil rights movement. And they are different things. They can be different things. Now, whether they are or not, we can argue about. But on the moral basis, they are different things. If there's not a moral difference, if homosexuality is not a moral issue, then obviously you're going to argue the other way. But for people who believe homosexuality is wrong, it's just nonsensical to compare that with something that has no moral constituency to it. Okay, so with that said, one last comment.
Can I say something about that really quick? My point there was that there was a time where the general consensus in society was that interracial marriages should not take place. My point is, even at that time, even though the society thought that was the case, it was still wrong.
So let me be more direct in my response. The idea that because in some ways we are wrong, and learn about that and make changes, then every change that's proposed ought to be adopted is nonsensical.
No.
Some changes are good, some changes are bad. That's all I'm trying to say. Not the same thing.
All right, we're going to go into the... I'm going to mix this up a little bit. David, is marriage a right or a privilege?
I had them in order.
Okay. All right.
I'll do it. You're the moderator.
Feels a little better.
You know, I think that this is... I completely disagree when you say marriage is not a right. I think
for anyone. I'm saying for me either. For anyone. It's just not... The word is incorrect. The word rights shouldn't be applied. That's what I'm trying to get across.
Well, whenever you say that our rights are endowed by our Creator, what do you mean by that?
Well, again,
you said a right
same thing the authors meant, which is, John Locke originally and then Thomas Jefferson. The idea of rights in their minds, same thing Edmund Burke talks about, which a lot of libertarians in this room know. And that is that they're inherently negative and never positive, so I don't have a right to a hot dog. When I think of myself having a right to a hot dog, what I could mean in some legitimate way might be, if anybody else can go get a hot dog and all they have to do is pay this amount of money or show up at this place, then I shouldn't be prevented from it just because I'm human or different.
We agree on that.
But that's the point. My autonomy is a right that I have, not the hot dog. So I can't just walk up and take someone else's hot dog. I don't have a right to a hot dog. I have a right to autonomy. That's fine. But my autonomy doesn't extend to being able to do things that violate everyone else's autonomy. And I think we're in agreement about that. We're just in disagreement about how it manifests itself on this issue. Right?
I believe so, which I think is interesting because the whole argument of abortion would go against what you just said.
No. I'm adamantly pro-life with exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
But then that would give the government the right to
protect one life from another person.
Protect one life, yet make laws concerning someone's bodily autonomy.
Yeah, of course. It's just like no. It's just like no. This is the whole nature of the rights. So if I say I have a right to life, or people have a right to life, then if someone kills someone, then that's why I'm in favor of the death penalty. If someone kills someone, then they forfeit their life. That's the whole point of it, because rights are preserved in a society where you say you can't violate someone else's prerogative.
Okay, so you think that marriage is a privilege? Deemed by society, as long as you have...
I'm not even saying privilege. I think privilege still puts it on the individual and misses the point that it's a social act. That the social act is what makes marriage what it is.
So whatever society decides, that's marriage?
By definition. Which is why we kept Utah out of the Union until they agreed with our social definition of what would be and wouldn't be marriage. My question would be, are you in favor of polygamy? Do you believe polygamy ought to be legal in the country? And I'm assuming you'll say yes. I mean, that would be not irrational.
I haven't made up my mind about that. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to the women, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption is we change this law and then polygamy changes in 5 years.
No,
8 years.
I mean, if you know, on one hand, I'm
the pressure is there.
I'm going to answer you though.
Okay.
On one hand, I'm really torn about it, because on one hand I want to say if consenting adults want to join into that and make up their mind, they have the decision to. On the other hand, I disagree with the concept, and I feel like it's that most of the women who are forced into that, usually because of religion, let's not forget, usually are forced into that, end up on the raw end of the deal. So I'm
not my religion.
My position is evolving on that one. As Obama said.
Yeah, well, this would be exactly my point, though. I mean, society does have. Look, if a guy moves into an apartment with 5 women, you know, what is there? There's no law to say you can't do that.
Right.
And I won't go beyond that.
Well, there's a government aspect, there's a welfare aspect of it, there's a financial thing behind it.
But the point is,
women are collecting checks.
We recognize that even though they can do that in their behavior, they don't have a right to demand from society that we sanction it, that we say, we approve of this, because that's what marriage is. It's society saying,
but I think
we
it's
approve
unfair.
of this.
I think it's unfair, Dr. Kramer, to equate one man having 9 wives from 2 people that love each other, that want to get married and share equal property, that just happen to have the same gender.
And I'm not trying to equate
thing.
that. You're right, I'm not trying to equate that. I'm simply trying to make the point that we do recognize that society sets boundaries on marriage, and therefore marriage to anyone, anywhere, anytime is not the case in our society. We say there are some things that are marriage and there are some things that are not, which means you can't say whoever wants to get married anywhere, anytime, they have a right to it. That's not the case. So the disagreement is about where the line should be drawn, who can get married and who can't get married. And the question is, how do you draw that line? Well, I'd love to draw the line for everybody. I'll just open the Bible and I'll prove to them this is the case, but I don't believe in a theocracy. I believe in a democracy. Okay. And so I believe it's a social definition of that boundary. And that's the only reason. Is when the society votes for it, I'm not going to be able to say anything about it. I mean, I'm going to be able to say things about it personally, but I'm not going to be able to say anything about it in the society. But when the society is standing against it, to demand that we say it is to be intolerant of those who hold the view that homosexuality should not be endorsed as the means by which we want to promote family living or whatever it is.
So for you, this isn't really about the concept of homosexuality.
No.
It's about the sociological acceptance of the term marriage.
Not just the term marriage, but yes, of marriage and the social understanding of where same-sex relationships
So for people
fit.
that want to get married because of the legal benefits or the medical benefits or the benefits of being able to make decisions upon their partner's behalf when they're in the hospital or something.
All of that, in my opinion, is a smokescreen.
None of that
I don't mean it's not sincerely designed.
I guess what I'm trying to say is none of that matters to you as long as society doesn't accept those 2 people having a marriage. You don't care that they want all of those things.
Well,
if society
actually, that's
doesn't accept
backwards
it,
of what's true for me. If that's all that a same-sex couple wants, then they just get that piecemeal. You know, just go get it piecemeal. That's not it. They want that very important. I mean, it is. I think this is true. I mean, same-sex couples are making a fair complaint when they say, but we don't get to have this status of marriage associated with it because that's the most important relationship in life and you're telling me I can't have it. I think that's a fair interpretation on their part. But it's not an interpretation about sharing property or contractual rights or the ability to visit in the hospital or make a decision for them because you can do all that through other legal means. They want all of that, and I understand why, because I want it in marriage. They want all of that to be tied to this sexually intimate, socially approved relationship that we call marriage.
I interviewed, I was out in New Mexico and I interviewed a gay Christian for my show because I find that concept in itself to be very intriguing. And during pieces of the recording, I stopped at one point because he got a phone call. And he's on the phone, he's talking to the guys about coming to his apartment for some sort of repair, cable repair or electricity or something. And he says, "Don't worry, my roommate will be home." And he's been with this man for 17 years and still has to use terms like, "My roommate will be home." Mm-hmm. And I literally felt nauseous when I heard that. I hurt for him because I want him to not be ashamed of who he is in love with. And although I happen to be straight, I can't imagine what it would be like to live in a society where I'm not allowed to say, "My wife will be there." I have to pretend she is something else so that I don't get made fun of when the phone call is over.
Yeah,
and that's really what this is about.
I'm not celebrating the pain either. I am not celebrating the pain.
I think ultimately he has a right to be able to use the same language anybody else does that's in love.
Not from the language. Not from the language. I mean, in fact, that's in truth self-contradictory, because the language is a demand that society say it's okay. So what we're doing is we're saying, I want the approval of a group whose definition and status of approval I want to mandate to be changed. The society says, this is what we sanction, and this is why we use this vocabulary, and it's because we value heterosexual couples as families. That's why. Good, bad, or indifferent. I think it's good, by the way. But good, bad, or indifferent, that's what the society is saying. And the same-sex couple are saying, I understand why, emotionally and psychologically, I get it, it's painful. They are saying, we want to be able to use the vocabulary that says you have approved of us, when they haven't. The society hasn't approved of them.
Now, before time is up, let me just say this final thing. I think it's not that we demand you to be supportive of something that we think is all right. It's really that we know that all of the oppression really stems from religious belief and religious doctrine. And what we're saying is, don't let religious doctrine overrule the Constitution, which left it legal in the first place.
Does the rest of the society have the freedom to express their conscience or not? And if they do, what difference does it make to you whether it came from their religion or their atheism? What difference would it make? They're expressing their values, and you're saying they're not allowed to express that value.
They're allowed to express it.
Okay, as a society, here's the expression of our value. We do not sanction same-sex relationships. Do I believe we should go on a hunt to find people? Absolutely not. Do I believe we should persecute people? Absolutely not. I don't believe any of that.
Many societies have.
Believe me, I know that. I'm not condoning any of that. I am saying to say that this majority of society are not allowed to express their conviction that marriage should be heterosexual.
No, they are allowed to express it. I would never say someone doesn't have the
freedom
to express it.
That's the point of saying, then that's what marriage is for. Marriage is society saying, that's why we approve of this.
Expressing your opinion on something and putting millions of dollars into taking rights, two different things.
Okay. Well, Dr. Kramer, how does gay marriage hurt traditional marriage?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the implication of that question for me. I don't think it threatens, the relationships that married couples have. But in society, it threatens the institution of marriage, the nature of what marriage is in that society, by definition, because that's why we use the word. We use the word marriage to say, this is the kind of relationship we want to promote for couples in our society, for families in our society. And so it's not to me that it's a threat to traditional relationships. It is to me a threat to the institution that we believe provides a moral basis for our society. So, when people, all of this science stuff, and I'm not a scientist. I don't do that stuff. It's beyond me, and I am respectful of the work that they do. But Mark Regnerus, I have no idea how to say that man's name, in Austin, has just been brutalized over a legitimate sociological study that people who disagree with it have acknowledged is the best research that's been done. It's not sufficient. There needs to be more research. But he came to a conclusion that adult children of heterosexual relationships had some psychological stability or advantage over adult children of same-sex relationships, blah, blah, blah. It was just all he did was just report the findings, and he was brutalized because of the agenda, which is largely in his field. His PhD is in sociology. That's where he works at UT, Austin, and where he wrote this report and had it published in the, whatever it is, Sociology, I think is the name of the journal itself. And he was brutalized for it because he just reported that it might be the case that heterosexual couples produce healthier relationships long term. Now, I don't know that that's going to prove to be true or not. I really don't know.
We've got a topic for gay parents adopting. So
yeah, okay, we'll handle that then.
Yeah, we'll do that
that's good. Fair enough.
But as far as it hurting traditional marriage,
or the institution of
my point is to say the society has a right, and I'm using that word loosely now, but society has this prerogative, I guess is the word I should use, of defining the things that are in its interest. And it, for now, defines in its interest heterosexual marriage as the institution that ought to be foundational to our family structures. And only because broadening the definition does not allow the society to say that with this word anymore. I believe it hurts the nature of what traditional marriage as a term means in our society.
You seem to be purposefully avoiding the God reasoning or the biblical basis behind.
Because I don't believe in dictating to people from theocracy. It's not a theocracy. I can't stand up and say the Bible says it, therefore you got to do it.
So are you telling
democratic society.
Are you telling me that because you've stated that, because you've said it's a sociological developing issue, that once 51% of the country's population
then the country
ultimately agrees on gay marriage, you're telling me that you will then say you do believe gay marriage should be legal because society voted that way?
And that it's still wrong. Yes, I'll say
what?
both. I'll say both. Not everything that's wrong is illegal.
It's still...
Yeah, I believe in the rule of law. There are laws that I believe are immoral, but they're still the law. I pay my taxes, even though I believe the tax code's immoral. But I still pay my taxes. So I'm going to respect the laws of the land, and the laws of the land are what they are. It's not like I can just set up my own little constitutional monarchy.
So you don't... Okay.
I am not, as an individual, the whole of society. So I can't define, in the future, marriage for myself. But I can say, I think this society is wrong. I can say that, even when they're making it legal. And I think they will. Eventually, I think
so then once it's made illegal, let's talk about why you think it's...
legal.
Right. What did I say?
Illegal, I think.
Oh, once it's made legal, why would you still think it's wrong? Let's talk about that.
Because man doesn't make what's right and wrong. This is a part of the fundamental divide between you and me. My belief about why homosexual marriage is wrong does entail that I believe homosexuality is wrong, obviously. That's why I think same-sex relationships are the ones that ought to define marriage. I believe all of that based on my relationship with God. But when I'm establishing public policy, I don't have the prerogative of just dictating to people my personal values.
Well, you do in the form of...
Only if there's a majority who are with me.
In the form of voting.
And we've all got the option to get out there and convince as many people as we can. And I've got to live with the laws that get by through you, just like you've got to live with the laws that get by through me, which means we try to do it. But at the end of the day, we're going to find it more and more difficult to do that because we have more and more of a divide on basic values in our culture. It's becoming more and more difficult. Which is why, again, I appreciate this dialogue, because there are times when you and I have been able to say, well, look, I still don't disagree. I still don't agree, but I understand better where you're coming from.
And I'm glad you said that, because I do understand better where you're coming from here. It makes more sense to me.
Well, embarrassingly, I have to say I don't hear this a lot out in, public rhetoric.
No. I can say that that's an argument that most people don't use when they're talking about preventing gay marriage. They don't just say because society is against it. As a matter of fact, most of the people that are preaching against it are preaching against it because God's against it, because it's in the Bible. They never just say, well, you know, when society deems it acceptable, I'll be fine with the fact that it's legal. So then my question will be for you, Dr. Creamer, when society does say, and I say when, not if, because it's
I know, it is coming down.
when society does accept gay marriage, are you going to feel that devalues or threatens your traditional marriage in any way?
Certainly, because traditional marriage is about society. And so, yeah, of course I'll believe society is being threatened by it.
But once society agrees, I'm saying once society agrees, gay marriage is okay.
Societies can agree on something that's wrong. So now, this is not related in any way. I'm not making a moral equivalence here. I'm making the point that societies can adopt a view that is wrong. Societies can do that. They did it in the 1930s, and they've done it at other times. That's a much different example. I'm not equating the two. I'm just saying people can do the wrong thing and all agree together to do it, but it still be wrong. That's all I'm saying. So
even divorce, for example, even divorce is legal. You think it's wrong.
Of course, exactly.
But you think it should be legal.
Well, actually, on that one, I not only should it be legal, like we tolerate it because society tolerates it, that one I think does have moral justification too. There's a reasonable sense. Divorce is in Scripture, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Right. And as far like other biblical concepts such as premarital sex, you don't think those things should be outlawed, even though society may say.
Yeah, this is no. I appreciate you raising it that way because this is another thing people get really confused about. The fact that I believe homosexuality is immoral, which I'm sure we'll come back to, doesn't mean that I think it has to be illegal. It doesn't mean I don't either, but it doesn't mean I have to think it's illegal. Just like lying, lying is immoral. Lying doesn't need to be illegal. There's no point in that.
I personally think that the celebrity 72-hour marriage is more of a threat to traditional marriage than same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
So if anybody needs to put laws into something like that.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not. It's not an either or to me. They're both problems.
Shall we move on next? Should gay parents be allowed to adopt?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm very intrigued by that statement you made, and this is not just a display, let's go out and argue about this. I'm very interested in what you mentioned. What study was that?
Mark Regnerus. You just look up his name, you'll get a plethora of hits. He has been eviscerated over the past 3 or 4 months.
It's interesting.
Maybe longer, 6 months.
In my research, not only for my podcast, but also just for this debate and just in general reading, there was a recent study, and I'll actually email you, or I'll mention it on the show so that someone knows. I'll go cite the study that I read about because I didn't cite it here.
Yeah.
But it was a group of authors that were writing a book, and it showed that children, specifically in lesbian homes, scored higher than kids in straight families on self-esteem, confidence, and were less likely to have behavior problems or aggression. And it may be, my position on that is that it's because they're being raised in a home that is threatened by society in general, and they're raised with compassion and tolerance. To say, yeah, people are going to scream things at us, and we have to process that and realize that that has no real effect on our value. And these kids are being raised with ultimate values of respect and dignity because they're ultimately, I think, victims of a society that's behind in history.
I mean, it's a nice thought. There's just no evidence that that's why it is or what it is. And if you'll go look at this Regnerus thing, which is not, again, it's not going to be definitive either. I don't know that his study is going to stand up in 5 years or 8 years. There's an inherent problem with his study as well that I can mention in a minute. But all of these studies are, unfortunately, agenda-driven. So, and sociology, and I'm not trying to be insulting if there are any sociology PhDs here, it's just a reality. Sociology has a real reputation as an aggressively social engineering, basically, leftist type of discipline. And it's a very it's a discipline that leans in that direction. And the reality that scientists, including sociologists, allow their agenda to shape their study, the selection of the material and the topics and what they want to find and what they do find, is just built into it, which also means, I'm agreeing with you on this part, that Regnerus' study is probably unjust also. I mean, inherently, you're doing a study on same-sex, on the impact of same-sex parenting and heterosexual parenting from the same time period with adult offspring, then you're doing it in a setting where it's not a sanctioned relationship. So obviously there's a problem built into it. But you start with what you have.
Another one.
But his study is the one that is respected as having the best blend of data.
I'll definitely look it up. Not that it's going to change my opinion on it.
No,
I'm interested in the data. But
it wouldn't change my opinion either.
One thing I have noticed about some of these studies that come out, because I have read several, that will say that children of homosexual households or homosexual parents have some sort of issues or behavior problems. What they fail to tell you in a lot of the studies that I've been digging in, many of their participants were actually products, the children were actually products of a straight marriage that resulted in divorce, and then the mother later came out as a lesbian and got with another woman. And they were part of the study as well. So the child also is a product of divorce.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you.
Other trauma. So
sometimes I'm not going to disagree with you on any of that. None of that's my reasoning. My reasoning is the same as the civil unions thing. I don't think any steps in that direction are appropriate. So do you think,
despite that study, to answer the question, obviously I think that gay parents should be allowed to adopt, or gay couples. Why do you think, other than that one study that you admit may be flawed, or at least...
No, I'm not. That study is not my reasoning.
So what is your reasoning for not letting...
The same reason I oppose civil unions. I don't want any steps taken in the direction of sanctioning same-sex marriage, that idea. So just like singles adopt people, you evaluate based on the individual, all that kind of stuff, and that happens. The same way in those kinds of relationships. If you have a same-sex relationship and the couple adopts, you are inherently saying, you are implicitly saying, I should say, this is a relationship that's proto-marriage, if not marriage itself.
So I
just think it's deceptive.
So do you think single parents...
One way or the other. Not on the part of the couple, I'm saying on the part of society.
Should single adults be allowed to adopt?
Yeah, look, my option is always going to be for a heterosexual couple to adopt first. But of course, then there are other options too, where singles do adopt.
So if they're...
I don't think it's the best option.
Then do you agree that a single who would be a great parent, happens to be homosexual, but is not with anyone, should he or she be allowed to adopt?
Yeah, it's a completely different question, and probably so. I'm not going to...
So one homosexual can adopt, just not two?
Right, because again, the issue is marriage. The issue is marriage. If I'm saying to you, what sense would it make for me to say, yes, I want this couple who do not have a sanctioned public relationship to be able to adopt this one child? What does that mean?
That's why I didn't understand why you said a single adult should be able to adopt. If truly what you're protecting...
No, because a single adult is tied to the child himself. That's it, or herself.
Yeah, but that person may find someone.
It's a simple relationship. The relationship that's established by the adoption of a single child is a relationship that mimics marriage. So society, in my opinion, in that state, is being hypocritical, saying, well, we're going to treat you as if you're married because we know it's coming down the road maybe, but we're not going to approve the marriage. If you're going to do it, do it. If you're not going to do it, don't do it. That's all I'm saying to you. So, but I'm in favor of not doing it. I'm not trying to leave it neutral.
Any more on this topic? Okay. And I'm going to switch up the notes a little bit, but Dr. Creamer, is being gay a choice?
I get to answer the question.
And of course, David can chime in.
Yeah, feel free to chime in whenever you want. My answer is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me whether it's a choice or not. And even the term choice, again, I'm not creating an equivalence between these two things. So I'm going to use an example that I do not believe is related to homosexuality, okay? Is addiction a choice? So I say I've got an addiction to chocolate candies. Is that a choice? I could be born with some genetic predisposition to be addicted to chocolate candies. I could be born with a behavior that inherently manifests itself as, the consumption of chocolate candies. Or I could have chosen as a kid to eat so much chocolate candy that I just fell in love with it and I can't resist it anymore. I don't know. But if there's a point at which I say, well, you shouldn't be eating chocolate candy, then that becomes the question. Now, somebody might not be able to stop it, at that point, because they're addicted to it. They just can't stop it. So when you say, is it a choice, I don't know what you mean by that. Does that mean, was there a point at which a person did something to develop the desire for a homosexual relationship? I doubt it, and I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't make any difference to me. So if you ask me the question, though, does society need to approve that relationship, then the answer of whether it came from a choice or from a genetic predisposition or from a certain psychological moment in upbringing or by pure free will doesn't change the issue at all. So my answer to the question is I don't know, and I'm not sure I care whether it's
actually I disagree. Surprisingly, it's a pretty big part of the problem, because nowhere else in society are we allowed to discriminate against people for something that they had no control over.
False. That's false entirely.
Tell me how it's false.
Pedophiles say exactly the same thing. I'm not equating the two things. I'm not equating the two behaviors. They're not the same thing. That is false, because there are plenty of people who say, I cannot help it that I love children. I cannot change that. That's who I am.
But
and I agree. They're not morally equivalent. I'm not saying they're morally equivalent.
In pedophilia, someone is being hurt against
I agree. It's wrong, and you agree it's wrong, and I agree that it's not morally equivalent to homosexuality. That's not the question. You said there is no other condition where we keep people from doing what comes naturally to them.
That's not what I said.
Well, something like that. Whatever. What was it you said? No, say it your way.
I said
it's a fair point.
That there's no other, that we don't, I don't even remember what I said. Play back the video so
I think what you said was, in no other way do we discriminate based on
things that we have no control over.
Yeah.
Right, so there are always
So that guy says he has no control over it, and we do discriminate against him because of it. That was my point.
It's like I have no control over
but because
breaking into houses. I'm just a klepto. I have to do it. Well, if you're harming someone else, or you're taking property, or you're harming children, society will stop you, but gay marriage is not even close to that.
Okay, now you chose an example where you don't believe there's a deterministic force that brought the person to that condition. I chose an example where people do say there's a deterministic force that brought the person to that condition. And we do discriminate against that person. Discrimination is an abusive term because it is automatically associated with civil rights and racial discrimination. That's how the word is used now. I mean by this statement, we're discriminating against that pedophile by simply saying we make a difference with him. We say that behavior is not acceptable. Again, I don't believe those two behaviors are equivalent. I'm not saying they're morally equivalent, but I am saying because I'm willing to say this moral statement about this behavior, which may have been determined in that person for all I know. They may have no control over it whatsoever. I'm still willing to restrict it. So our disagreement is going to end up being about the morality of same-sex relationships.
I suppose so, because ultimately, I guess what I'm hearing though is if it is not a choice, and I know that some people are bisexual and have the ability to go both ways, and that I don't understand. I want more research on it. But for the majority of people who are of one sexual orientation or the other, putting laws around who they can and can't marry, if it's not a choice, if they are truly born that way, we're telling them that the only type of marriage we will accept is one that they are uncomfortable with. So they must pretend or go through the motions that's acceptable by society to get the same benefits or social acceptance. They have to be in a monogamous relationship with a person of the opposite sex before we will stamp it as approved.
Again, I agree that the psychological and emotional trauma that are associated with it are grievous. I agree with all of that.
So you don't think society should be more progressive?
The idea that society has to approve of everything that people feel compelled to do is not, it's just a non-starter.
Look,
we don't do that.
I got a couple of
no matter how painful it is for the person.
I got a couple of facts here, not necessarily for your benefit, but for the benefit of the audience at least, around the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association both have done studies, and biologically speaking, when one identical twin is gay, there's a 52% chance that the other is also gay. If one separate birth sibling is gay, there's only a 6% to 10% chance that another sibling will be gay. When identical twins share an amniotic sac, they nearly always have the same orientation, gay or straight. Ray Blanchard discovered accidentally that each time a woman gives birth to a son, the chance that the next boy will be gay increases by 30%. It's absolutely biological.
No, that's not true. I am, the study I'm familiar with, the Blanchard study I'm familiar with, I am also aware that that study doesn't take into account other causal effects, and that's one of the critiques of it historically. It's an old study, but but again, it doesn't change my view either way. But saying that proves it's absolutely biological.
So if you don't carry the way,
it's quizzical why the other 60% weren't the same.
If you don't carry the way, let's pretend that it is biological and they have no choice.
I will pretend.
So if they have no choice and they are born that way, assuming that's the case, you're just telling them, sorry, you got dealt a bad hand, you were born attracted to people that you can't marry? Too bad?
Yes.
You don't think we should do anything about that? We shouldn't correct that wrong?
Correct which wrong?
The wrong that's being, the rights that are being taken from them, saying that they can't get married because they were born a certain
It's not a right. This is the opening of the discussion, and I think, I've made that point as clearly as I can, so I don't know it has to be rehashed. It's not a right to begin with. Are there tragic things that happen in the world, and do people suffer as a result of it? Absolutely. Do I believe we should mitigate the suffering as much as possible? Absolutely. Do I believe we should sacrifice the basic values of society and democracy in order to do that? No. So that's why I won't overturn a democratic ruling. If it happens democratically, I'm not going to have some revolution against it. I think society expresses its direction in terms of that social sanction.
I bet you eat Chick-fil-A, don't you?
Actually, never. I would though.
I certainly appreciate everybody sticking around for this debate. It's a very important one, like I said at the beginning. And I think the debate needs to happen more often. I had the opportunity to speak with Matt Dillahunty before this debate. We were talking about moral relativism and other nerdy things that we like to talk about. And he said that he was extremely happy that I was doing this debate mixed with the existence of the God of the Bible, because despite most of the rhetoric that you hear, that's ultimately where this comes from and that's where it's connected. And he said that he thinks this is actually the first debate in line with Atheism Plus. And I'm fine with that. I think it's absolutely something that needs to be addressed, and I think more people need to address it. Besides, rightwingwatch.com or some random preacher screaming out that we need to lock gays into a gate and, just throw food to them. That's the type of stuff that makes it onto television. And as you see, most Christians, I don't think, believe that way for 1 second. But the bottom line is, it is about marriage equality. And there's no reason we should ban couples that are in love from having decision-making ability when it comes to property or medical decisions simply because they share the same gender. Massachusetts, which became the first state to officially legalize gay marriage in 2004, had the lowest divorce rate in the country in 2008. The two aren't connected. If marriage was only about the ability to reproduce, infertile couples should be banned from getting married. That's not what it's about. My bottom line is gay marriage is protected by the Constitution's commitments to liberty and equality. That's what this country was built on. The U.S. Supreme Court declared in 1974's Cleveland Board of Education versus LaFleur the following: freedom of personal choice in matters of marriage and family life are one of the liberties protected by the Due Process Clause. In 2010, District Judge Vaughn Walker wrote, "Banning marriage is unconstitutional under both the due process and equal protection clauses. And if it's about God, well, then the church doesn't have to approve of it. But the day our Constitution is overturned based on the Bible, well, that's the day this ceases to be a free country." Thank you.
Hey, again, I want to thank David for inviting me to the debate, y'all's hospitality, and you've been really kind in listening to the things I've said, some of which I know are not necessarily right up your alley, and for some of you it is right up your alley. So either way, I appreciate the opportunity. I think where we find ourselves as a culture is, how long do I have for this?
5.
Okay, let me get there more quickly. Where we find ourselves as a culture is a product of our focus on individuals only. We have shrunk the world more and more to the point where we don't accept anyone outside of us as individuals telling us anything that we ought to do or have to do or what we ought to be. We're not comfortable with that. And I love the rise of individualism because of its promotion of freedom of conscience, that a person ought to make their own decision. They ought to choose faith in either object the way they want to, whatever. I'm for all of that. So I love individualism for this. And the natural consequence of that individualism is that we have stopped recognizing the value of social institutions as social institutions. That's what they are to begin with. So the more individualistic we've become over time, and thank heavens for the protection of freedom of conscience that came with that, the less concerned we've been with the social aspect of what this relationship's about to begin with. To the point that we believe it is tolerant to say to the majority of people that you must approve this relationship even if it violates your own conscience, even if it violates your belief about what this established social sanction is supposed to be for. We want you to approve of it our way instead. Now, I understand the fear that what we're doing is ramming our religion down everyone else's throat. I understand the fear of that. That would be the case. If I were saying to you, you must believe what I believe, you must do what I do, that would be the case. That's not this. This is you coming to me, not me personally, you coming to the society and saying, we want sanctioning for our relationship, and then demanding that that society provide it even though they don't sanction the relationship. Doesn't make sense to demand that. I don't believe we should demand it. Now, my reasoning is that I am a God-fearing, Christ-believing and worshiping and following Christian. This is who I am. That's why I reason that way. When I can't convince other people that they should have faith in Christ, when more people stop believing that and start believing that marriage ought to be this other thing than it is right now, broader than it is right now, in which case it will get broader and broader, and that's part of where society is going to go. I recognize all that goes with that. But in the meantime, my only prerogative for being able to preserve what I believe this institution of marriage should be is to encourage people to adopt my values. This is why I share Christ with them. Not just so those values be adopted, but so they'll know Christ. So I don't want it to be a belligerent conflict of hate, and I hate the suffering and the persecution that goes along with this issue. It is inappropriate. It's not just inappropriate, it's disgusting. I mean, what we want to say is all the right-wing people who want to put all the homosexuals in a cage, all those right-wing people ought to be put in a cage. You know, we're good with that. Because it doesn't help my case for him to get up and say that. He's messing up the whole point. It is not a matter of hate or disdain or judgment. It is a matter of saying, I have values that won't allow me to sanction that relationship. The majority of people in our society have values that will not allow us to sanction that relationship. Don't make us sanction it. That's all we're saying. Allow us that freedom. Thanks.
All right, and now the moment you've been waiting for. If you want to ask a question, come on up again.
Again, let's keep it restricted to questions and not comments. And it looks like there's a lot of people, so let's not do two-part questions. Let's do one part, say your question, and sit back down. If you want to come back up and go right back in line, go ahead. So, with that being said, let's go for it.
All right. I just want to say I really appreciate your honesty. I don't see in a lot of Christian speakers that I see out in this same similar circuit moving things. So I applaud that. The issue that you have, I understand what you're saying about sanction. I could go there, but I'm not. But it all stems from your belief that the gay choice, as many Christians have called, is wrong. And I guess my issue was that I would like to ask you about is, how do you approach the style of Christian cafeteria style, picking and choosing rules and laws from the New Testament, if we just go there, that being gay is wrong, or acting on being gay is wrong, such as, do you permit women to speak in church? Are they allowed to cut their hair? Do they have to wear a cover on their head?
Right.
Those are in the New Testament and clearly spoken of as being
Right.
something that Paul said they shouldn't do.
Yeah, and funny how most of those are actually related, but because I am a complementarian, I do believe there's a difference between the roles of men and women in churches. That's it. Not for any quality reason, it just happens to be there. But with that said, hermeneutics, just basic interpretive principles, tells me if the scriptures say, greet one another with a holy kiss, it doesn't mean I have to kiss everyone. Because in other places, and this is how we read all of Scripture inductively, we read a lot of passages together to make sense of it. In other places it says greet the brothers, and it doesn't say you have to kiss them. So fortunately I get to handshake instead, things like that. So I'm saying the same thing with that. Some of those expressions are particular to that instance or that congregation or that moment, and some are universal. And the difference is, are they repeated and are they made imperative repeatedly? And that's the question. And that one is, it's very clearly morally presented.
It has to do with interpretation of how you interpret
that one's not that difficult.
They're talking about
It
male
is
prostitution
morally
versus
stated.
homosexuality.
Okay, got a lot of questions.
A lot of discussion about that.
It was a good point and well made. I appreciate it.
Okay, if God gives little boys and little girls, brothers and sisters, and in one family you see two brothers, in another family you see two sisters, and in another family you see a boy and a girl, and sometimes you have a brother and a sister. When you grow up, I think God is also telling us that He gives us different life people to live with when we're young and when we're old. So if my childhood was with only a brother and not with a sister, I don't see why it's so prohibitive to choose to have an adulthood that's same-sex, or that is bisexual, or that is lesbian. Now, if we identify that there is loneliness and hurt, etc., surrounding gay marriage, then if we see that, I think that maybe, would you agree that it's a little bit not throwing a life preserver to someone who's drowning? If we see all these social harms with the people who want gay marriage, isn't it a moral obligation? Isn't it being like a savior, being like Christ, to save someone who's hurting? Because the doctor said that, yes, I know the pain, the psychological harm that you brought up with the person who has to say, well, this is my roommate and this is not my husband, or this is... So if God gives us same-sex partners to live with as children, I think that same God, allows us to grow into an adulthood and have same-sex partners, life partners.
Are you saying that you think God is okay with homosexuality and same-sex marriage?
Yeah, I think God sends us to this earth to live with two brothers or two sisters, or a brother and sister. And if we don't sanction it, do you agree that there's something unchristlike and immoral about that?
think that it's hypocritical to Scripture to say that God would condone a homosexual relationship when throughout the Bible he specifically dictates you are not allowed to do that, and not only, but goes a step further in the Old Testament and says to kill homosexuals, they should be stoned to death with stones so that their blood shall be upon them. And then in the New Testament, it even says in Romans that, I think she turned everything on.
Okay. No, my mic's on. Here.
Nope, I'm on.
Well, people can't hear you, so there you go.
Hello.
That's
I think our batteries are dying. Mine's red.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think that the Bible is very clear that it's against homosexuality. And even in the New Testament, it does mention, in a very verbose verse, that homosexuals ultimately, at the end of the verse, it says, are worthy of death. So it does not condone homosexuality at all. And I think Dr. Kramer would agree.
Well, of course, biblically, but I think in response to your statement, I would say that a sexual relationship is completely distinct from a non-sexual relationship. Completely different item, and way more than we can possibly get into right now. But I would heartily suggest, if you want to see my viewpoint, and I hold his viewpoint entirely on this particular issue, Roger Scruton is a philosopher from Oxford, I think, maybe Cambridge, I'm not sure. Roger Scruton, and he wrote a book called Sexual Desire that deals with this from a secular vantage point, philosophical vantage point, and basically his conclusion about why that particular type of relationship, a sexual relationship, is so distinct from a sibling relationship or anything else. So, yeah, thank you. It was a nice question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how do you feel about like people after they get like a sex change or like hermaphrodite? Should they be allowed to be married?
Yeah, well, hermaphroditism is a different issue than this question, but if you're talking about transgender people, is that right? Is that what you're asking?
Well, probably both. After the operation choice that they made, should they be allowed to?
Some people don't make a choice. I mean, hermaphroditism is
right. That was going to be the
feature of
second
nature.
part. That was going to be the second part.
That's why it says 2 parts. Yeah, I mean, 2 separate issues though. So if you're asking what should a transgender person do, my belief that we are created for a purpose dictates that I don't believe we should change our gender. I don't believe that's the right thing to do. Does that mean I think it has to be illegal or something like that? I'm not saying that. I don't know. I don't believe it's the right thing for them to have done. Does that mean they can't live the rest of their life? No. Does that mean it doesn't lead to confusing ethical issues when they're choosing a partner for the rest of their life? It will lead to confusing issues, but the transgender action, the surgical action, or whatever was chosen, is where the problem took place. From then on, the confusion is just a natural result of it.
So do you, but to his point though, I'm glad you asked the question. I didn't think of that. If someone is born a male,
That's
it
right.
feels like a female throughout their, I like this mic because it's louder. If they feel like a female and they change their sex, are they then, in your eyes, do you think they should be able to get married to someone that holds their original sex prior to the operation?
Yeah, I mean, my answer to that question isn't going to change the fact that I believe that decision was wrong and leads to the difficulty of the circumstance. In which case, I don't know what the best answer is. I don't know. So let's say that person went through that procedure, and then you can make it more complicated for me and say they went through that procedure, and then they basically repented of it. They said, oh, I wish I hadn't done this, but it's too late. You know, here I am committed to it. What am I supposed to do now? And then they came into me and said, would you marry me? I don't know how to do this. Who am I supposed to marry? This person or that person? Which way does it go? I would say, I don't know. I don't know the answer. But the fact that there are moral difficulties doesn't change the fact that some things are right, some things are wrong. The actual choice to go transgender, I think, should not have been made. That's where the...
And what about people that are born that way, the second part?
The hermaphroditism is another, I mean, that's why I said it's a much more difficult issue. It's just the
but
reality
I think it points to the issue
that some people are born. I'm assuming you take that as evidence that it is not the case that we are created for a purpose, that part of that purpose includes our gender. You're saying, well, it's just one of the evolutionary features. You know, some people are in between. I don't view it that way. I don't think the world is accidental. I do think there are things in the world that are a consequence of our current state, that we're not where we should be. And part of those consequences involve people. Some people are born in all kinds of conditions, with attitudes, with directions that are whatever we think is right or wrong. Some people are born more belligerent, like us. Some people are born more passive. Yes.
This question is for you, Dr. Kramer. Now, to start this off,
Now wait, aren't you supposed to be neutral? No, you're not sitting there anymore.
No, he's not a moderator.
I'm just a camera guy.
Yeah.
Just a camera.
I would like to start this off by saying that I actually am 19 and engaged. So
Mistake.
yeah, sure it was, Smalley, sure it was. That wasn't directed at me at all when you said that. But I am in a relationship, obviously, and it's a very loving relationship, a committed relationship. We love each other very deeply, and I'm not going to tell you their gender, that's key to this. We love each other, we live together, we struggle to pay the rent together, we have a child together from their previous relationship, and I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. Should I be allowed to get married to them? And should I be recognized, should my relationship with them be recognized as a marriage, even if the majority of society may disagree with it for whatever reason that is? And I'll tell you their gender answer.
If you came to me as a pastor and asked me this question, I would say, we've already made some mistakes, so let's try to work on those mistakes and see if we can get you back into a better position for having a marriage that's in the right way. Living together, living together right now, I believe is a mistake. I believe the sexual relationship should be preserved for that extant lifelong commitment. That's it. So if you don't already have that, then I think the sexual relationship ahead of that compromises. It doesn't ruin it, but it compromises.
How does sex compromise? Sorry.
Are we really going to go all the way down that road?
No.
Yeah.
But just so you know, she is a woman.
Either way, I mean, I would tell you that either way, though.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
This is for both of you. I had a psychology teacher who we had a discussion, let's say 2 days ago, that said gender and sex is different. Gender is your social, I guess, the social acceptance, I guess, and sex is your chromosome. Now, I have a friend who I've had since first grade, and they were born as an XXY. No sex organs, nothing like, and she takes estrogen pills for her entire life so that she can be a gender. And my question to you is how do you feel that goes into marriage as hetero, gay, so forth?
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that question, and I don't know the particulars of her circumstance. I don't know the particulars of her circumstance nor the answer to that question. I will say, does she look at it and say, I'm so glad that I'm not XY or XX. I'm so glad I'm XXY. That's what makes me who I am. I don't know. I don't know what her attitude about that is, but my presumption is that she probably looks at it with a little frustration every once in a while. And that's all I would say about it. That, some people are born with different attitudes, different conditions, different states. Some of them are great, some of them are terrible, and everywhere in between we just got to figure out how to live with it. And I don't know the answer to that question without dealing with her explicitly. Directly.
I'm so glad you asked that question, because it brings up the point the other gentleman was making about
hermaphroditism.
Hermaphrodites, and also transgender people choosing to change their biological sex because they don't feel like they belong to that specific gender. And that's my point, really, about this entire thing, is that it comes down to your socially accepted gender. It's about gender. It's not really about anything else. And for people that are like that, it becomes very confusing from his perspective. He has to keep saying, oh, I don't know. I don't know how to handle that. I don't know how to handle that. I know exactly how to handle that. He, she, whoever the person is, regardless of what gender they feel like or sexual organs they have, should be allowed to marry any person they are in love with. Bottom line, it's easy for me to answer.
So I just want to be clear on two things. Number one is, you are much more comfortable saying, I know the answer, than I am, which is ironic, considering the viewpoints we're supposed to have and the tragic imposition of my religion on everyone I'm supposed to be putting. Secondly, this is the nature of relationships in our society is part of the the object of this big discussion, right? Should same-sex marriage be legal? And these questions reveal the biggest divide between us on every topic. I believe that God creates, in fact, I can say it without God. I'm an essentialist. I believe that there is an essence, a nature, a purpose to the way we're supposed to be, and we either measure up to it or we don't, and that makes us very uncomfortable when we don't. Sometimes it's our fault, sometimes it's not our fault, but we don't measure up, and then we hate that, and we don't want to be told that. And your view is that there is no measure, there is no standard, there is no goal out there that we had to achieve in order to be approved, which is why I also look at us and say we're in need of a Redeemer, and you don't. So that's where the basic division is.
Yeah, my goal would be equality.
Well, your personal goal, but it's not necessarily a goal for anyone else. There's no moral reason for it. You just like it.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Krieger and David Smalley, for being here this evening. I have two questions for you, David. The first goes back to one thing you said earlier. You were talking about same-sex marriage, and you referenced interracial marriage. And some people would say that it is like comparing apples and oranges. And I know Dr. Krieger touched on this a little bit, where when you're talking about same-sex marriage and interracial marriage, it's like, I know you appreciate science, so if you want to say the science behind race, and you want to say, well, is being black genetic, is being white genetic, I mean, you can look to the science behind that, but my question is, wouldn't you say that the science behind being gay is less clear than the science behind being black, for instance?
As far as genetically?
Yeah, because you compared interracial marriage with same-sex marriage.
Valid point, yes. There are studies that are conflicting.
Right.
The studies that seem to make the most sense share that being gay is biological. But I really don't even want to go down that road of comparing the genetics of a race to genetics of sexual orientation. But honestly, they're both genetic. I don't know very many people that would argue with that didn't have a Christian viewpoint.
Well, what do you mean by both genetic? And just to follow up, like,
well, someone's race, someone's eye color, it's all genetic. The size of someone's hands or fingers, it's all genetic. It's biological. Just like this gentleman asked a question about the specific chromosomes in the XXY, it's genetic. A person's sexuality or reproductive organs, it's all genetic. Everything ultimately begins with biology. That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's pretty presumptuous. I mean, the idea that the psychological condition of desire would be equivalently genetic inherently somehow to the color of my eyes is just silly. And you know that. You know your psychology develops in more ways than just by genetics. You know genetic determinism is not established for psychology.
Right, and my point is that being gay is not a psychological decision. It's a biological...
No, I didn't say decision. It is a psychological state. It is a mental state. I desire this, not that. That's a psychological state. So is it entirely genetic or not? You can't say based on the fact that my eye color is a certain thing. It's just not the same thing.
I wouldn't, honestly, I wouldn't touch the question.
Okay. And
but it is a document with you on that one.
Let him ask his question. You can go to your second one.
Thank you.
Hey, I just wanted a clarification from David Smalley of why he hasn't come to a position yet on polygamy. And I only
do that to me.
Well, I only ask because I'm a gay person and I'm polyamory, and my end goal is to get married to multiple men. So.
Well,
thanks. These are the kind of things you don't want to happen in a gay. No,
I feel the strangest kinship.
You connected with the gay atheist. That is awesome. Well, no, I guess because of many of the people that enter, and I thought I clarified this, many of the people, let's call it traditional polygamy, and what I mean by that is the religious implications of one man saying he is allowed to have multiple wives, yet the wives are not allowed to have multiple husbands.
What you oppose is the subjugation of women.
Ultimately, yes, what I'm, right.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Since there's a new person right behind you. Okay.
Sorry, I'll try to be brief. My follow-up question for you, David Smalley, is in terms of like the body of research that's out there right now about the effects of fatherlessness on children, like just what happens to kids that don't have fathers, and sometimes there's those negative outcomes. Would you say that that could be a weakness of same-sex marriage, because by definition there's only one gender represented, and if we already have this research out there that says, you know, boys need fathers, girls need their fathers, like, so what do you say to that body of research?
I think it's an oversimplification. I think that single parents are absolutely amazing and do wonderful jobs. I'm the product of a single parent myself. My father wasn't around very much, and my mother had to sort of play both roles. And I don't know that I would agree with all of that research. I don't think that the research would be necessarily that effective. And I'm sure that we could disagree on that. I'm sure the Family Research Council has data to prove me wrong, yet there are multiple studies out there that would disagree. So no, I don't even agree that single-parent homes are bad for children. Because I can tell you, I know my father now, and I don't know that things would have been great if they would have stayed married. So I'm glad I'm very happy for the way I was raised with my mother and my mother alone. So having one gender represented, I mean, I'm still in society. I still went to daycares. I still went to schools. You know, there are cousins. There are you know, I mean, it's way more than just you're only exposed to one gender for a large portion of your development. It's really not that cut and dry. So I don't think that's the big problem at all.
So a large part of the discussion about whether the government should recognize gay marriage is the effect it's going to have on society. And my question is just to each of you, what are your thoughts on what the result will be to society if we take the opposite route and equalize, you know, gay marriage and polygamy to the same status as heterosexual marriage by government not recognizing any marriages and it being a solely private institution?
Yeah, I mean, it's already 9 o'clock, so my answer is I hate to do this to you, but my answer would be 30 minutes long, and I do teach this pretty regularly, but it would be to point you to Roger Scruton's book. It's not an exciting read, it's a great philosophical read, and it does make my point. So I do believe that some of it's attached to what you were saying, but on the opposite end. I think there's a strength in the heterosexual relationship being the sexual relationship that a couple, I agree with you. We're not in agreement, but I'm in agreement that all the violations of marriage are equally threatening to that institution. So not only does it have to be monogamous and heterosexual, it has to be lifelong. Every impingement on that, I view negatively
And
towards society.
just to clarify, you're saying the implications of the society if we rolled back the opposite direction, instead of allowing more people to get married?
Well, you would essentially, rather than the government recognizing, say, a gay couple for tax purposes, they wouldn't recognize anybody as a married couple. It would be solely a private institution. There's no such thing as...
It would
there'd be no such thing as a marriage license that you go and get from the government. It would be solely a private institution.
My point would be that would no longer be marriage.
Yeah.
And we just wouldn't exist. There you go, sir.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending this marathon of reason, I suppose.
A huge thank you should go to our gracious hosts, Collin College, and their media staff and their administration. They've been awesome helping us along the way. And so for skipping through 2 back-to-back debates, we think, you know, go to the pub is in order. So I've heard some talks of going to the Londoner pub in Allen. You can get to it just by going up Jupiter and going across Bethany.